Welcome to the Wellness at Work podcast, brought to you by the Learning and Development Projects at Silberman School of Social Work, Hunter College. This is a series of conversations designed to inspire wellness in helping professionals. Our conversations will focus on understanding the importance of self-care, reducing trauma, and bringing to listeners new ideas and practices that promote wellness at work and in your professional life. Welcome to our show today.
Welcome to the Wellness at Work podcast, brought to you by the Learning and Development Projects of the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College. This continues to be a series of conversations designed to inspire wellness. Our conversations will focus on understanding the importance of self-care, reducing trauma, and bringing listeners to new ideas and practices that promote wellness at work and your life. Welcome to our show today. Today, I'm having the pleasure of talking to Omari Williams. Omari is a mental health consultant, trainer, and facilitator with 20 years of experience serving diverse New York City communities in community-based outpatient educational and developmental settings. Grounded in experimental psychology and a trauma-informed lens, Omari equips professionals to turn trauma science into everyday practice that fosters safety, empowerment, and resilience. Guided by a deep belief in people's capacity to heal, Omari's work champions wellness, disrupts cycles of harm, and expands what is possible for communities determined to thrive. Welcome, Omari.
Geoff, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So, Omari, we're going to be talking today about the idea, and your idea, I should say, about the importance of debriefing.
Yeah.
So, can we start with what is debriefing and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish I came up with this, but I'm only here to support a lot of science that's been going on for decades at this point. When we think about debriefing, you could think about it in a couple of ways. In one way, debriefing is a structured, intentional dialogue that can take place after a high stress event or even informally in passing, right? So it's a tool to discuss cases, clarify facts, make sure that we're on the same page with what's going on in services. And at the same time, it's needed to process emotional impact of these cases to mitigate the onset of secondary traumatic stress. So it's much different from venting. This is not merely what some folks are afraid of, where they feel like it might be going to more of an emotional, opinion-based space rather than really meeting the holistic needs of the staff member at that time.
So I'm a supervisor, let's say. I'm a supervisor in adult protective services, and I've received some training about how the system works, and I've received some training about how to lead a team. Where does the debriefing fit in?
Yeah, so the debriefing fits in when we think about the relationship between the organization, right? So when we think about the organization, we're thinking about leadership, including supervisors, even supervisors at mid-levels, but also bridging that connection to staff. I think historically, organizations may have felt like staff aren't necessarily connected to the mission, but when we see people in human service fields, they come in with a different passion, Geoff. You're well aware of the people who are attracted to this work. And where they may not fit in one space, they'll definitely find another one that allows them to commit to the work that they hope to do. So where debriefing fits in, you could say it's almost like a organizational bridge between staff and supervisors that allow for the mission and the vision of the organization to be transmitted to the staff, and the staff be able to respond in kind with what they want to contribute to the work as they work directly with the people in the community that they're serving.
I see. So if we could dig a little bit deeper down, so is there a critical connection between the relational health of a team and trauma?
Absolutely. Because when we think about the environments that we find ourselves in working in this industry, trauma is an occupational hazard. And this is throughout social work and community-based settings. Specifically, when we think about APS staff, think about the kind of things that I want to start off by saying everyday average people who choose to take this job are exposed to conditions that they may have never experienced in their life
Mhm.
otherwise, right? Geoff, I remember in a prior episode, you mentioning the first time that you walked in an environment with one of your clients that was smoking crack at the time, right?
Right.
I can't imagine what was going on in your mind mentally, physically, and emotionally at that time, right? Uh,
Right.
yeah, and think about the exposure that our staff are exposed to on a regular basis. We're talking about extreme levels of neglect, physical abuse, severe hoarding. And we can't necessarily, well, for one, I don't expect the average person to know how to manage these conditions, right? Secondly, it's very well not only documented, but safe to assume that when being exposed to these situations, that there are going to be impact to the individuals who not only encounter them, but chronically find themselves in spaces where they're asked to provide intervention for them as well.
Hmm. So, okay. So you have folks who are going out and dealing with extremes of otherness and sort of, you know, this is work that's really quite, to my mind, very heroic in a sense, because they're having to sort of make their way in situations that, as you've said, that are completely foreign to them and with people who are at serious risks very often. So how does the debriefing, if we can just talk a little bit, how does that work?
Mhm. Well, the debriefing, when we think about the debriefing, I think a lot of times, like going off of base of what you said, I was actually thinking like, yeah, because the everyday person isn't clinically trained, right? So I think that's why when during debriefing or certain types of supervision, individuals might be feel a little bit pressured because they don't feel like they feel like in order to meet the emotional needs of someone that they need to be trained in some kind of clinical model, right?
Mhm.
Where when we just look at individuals and people for who they are, at the foundation of it is relational health. So,
Mhm.
with relational health, the belief that somebody cares about me or that I'm supported by the team that I'm around me, relational help allows teams to act as a buffer to trauma and stress, right? So, supervisors providing a safe space for debriefing. Hey, so tell me, having interest and curiosity, what was your experience like? And allowing someone the opportunity to unpack and really come to mind all of their experiences. Geoff, I'll tell you a funny story real quick, right?
Okay.
One, I have a million godkids, right? And
Mhm.
I ask every one of them when I talk to them, all of them are in their young adolescent stages. So they're either in preschool or elementary school. So I oftentimes ask them, "How was your day?" What kind of response do you think I typically get, Geoff?
Well, you're talking about young kids. Like I don't know. I think they would be talking about they wouldn't be talking about the dramatic stuff. They'd be talking about the fun stuff.
Geoff, I wish. I
Oh.
wish they'll say fine or good. And I'd
Oh, interesting.
oftentimes have to follow up and ask them, well, what was good about it? What was the best part of your day? And I mentioned that because even as adults, when we talk about debriefing, we're assuming that individuals are expressing the full depth of their experience or how they're feeling. But quite often, people haven't been given the space to practice that. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So why don't we model that? So I'm a case, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I just came from seeing, no, I just came from a conversation with somebody who's being abused, and I'm
Yeah.
really don't know what to do with it. I'm just
Mhm.
shaken by it.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm the caseworker. You're the supervisor.
Yeah.
How do you start that conversation?
And we're talking about from a
Uh,
healthy briefing perspective, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We're
Um,
going to get to the non-healthy patient.
okay. So I think first and foremost, a lot of our work in social work and social sciences, even here at APS, um, they adopted an old medical model where we're going straight for the problem, right? Where
Hmm.
I think if you're coming in after having a difficult interaction, my first question is going to be, how are you doing?
Hmm.
Right? First triaging and bringing to attention and gaining an understanding for how the person across from me is doing first, because before gauging their emotional well-being, their headspace, I could be neglecting information that could help enrich that engagement, pull further information out, provide support for staff that might need it in ways that they're also not able to recognize as well. But also, I think if we're not concerned or insightful rather about the mental state of who we're debriefing with, we could be missing out on valuable information due to the emotional and mental space
Yeah.
that person is in at the time.
So I say to you, essentially what one of your God children is saying to you. Everything was fine except for this one thing.
Yeah.
It was, it was a difficult. I'm trying to, I'm trying to man up and saying, well, it was a little difficult, but I got through it.
Yeah. It was a little bit difficult and you got through it. And I think also when we think about our staff, and I think the history of our workers, we're very prideful in a sense, right? We want to make sure that the work isn't tearing us down or that we're able to stand in the face of some pretty challenging situations to support a vulnerable community. So I think first and
So,
foremost, even
so what would you say? What are you going to
yeah.
say?
No, I'm thinking first affirming them, right? Because if they
Right.
believe like, hey, everything is okay, I'm like, I know you're dedicated to the families that you're working with and you're quite insightful about the necessary interventions. What would you say are some of the most impactful events that happen during this situation, right? Just really asking some broad questions that allows them the space to unpack and open up about what they feel like were impactful. And the great thing about that, Geoff, is that oftentimes when we're listening, it's not only what's being said, we get to listen to the heart of the matter, what's underlying underneath that, right? So the more that I'm able to get staff to open up instead of pushing my agenda, I can get to hear some things or ask questions about what I'm not hearing in that engagement.
Okay. So I think that was enormously helpful to hear.
Yeah.
Um, you're right. Let's not go right to, did you complete the visit? Let's not go. Really, you're starting. It's interesting because you're taking a person-centered approach with the person who's serving people and that person should also be taking a person-centered approach. So it's kind of a universal approach of centering on the person you're with at the moment, which is really very interesting.
Absolutely. And Geoff, it's also connected to a concept called the parallel process. Um,
Parallel.
yes, the parallel process, right? So, what we do in our organizations, how we connect as individuals between staff and supervisor, staff and organization, that's how the community that we serve are also going to be impacted. And oftentimes, that boomerang also has the opposite effect. Us working in traumatized communities, stress begets more stress.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if you've ever walked in a room and there's a difference between the vibe you get from walking in a room that welcomes you. Your body comes alive.
Hmm.
Different senses start to act in an excited way than otherwise, right? But then
Yeah.
those other spaces where you know you're not necessarily welcomed, your body then comes into like a survival mode. And
Mm.
that too impacts behavior. So if we're interacting with a community where stress is high, trauma is high,
Mm.
folks are in their survival mode. When we interact with someone, say for instance, during a home visit, the first one, in fact, and instead of like welcoming arms, like, yes, thank God you're here. I need so much help. It's get the hell out of here. Who sent you here? I could take care of myself. I don't need you. Geoff, I could only imagine some of your staff going into communities and also feeling impacted by that. If we ignore that wound, Geoff, we're also ignoring a greater part of the work that is so throughout the way that we do this work.
So, Omari, let's is is there evidence that supports this whole debriefing practice for supervisors?
Absolutely. And it comes in different forms. The need to debrief and communicate with someone who is under distress is something as long as our medical practice here in our country, right? But the way that we've come to know it today started in the 80s with Dr. Sandra Bloom and the sanctuary model. Sandra noticed that in the heavily medical model of therapeutic services, that authority and judgment really didn't work well with the rehabilitation of people undergoing trauma and high levels of emotional distress. So, what we come to know as the six SAMHSA core values actually started as seven commandments, right? And those commandments were nonviolence, emotional intelligence, social learning, democracy, open communication, social responsibility, and growth and change. And this is from the 80s, Geoff, right?
Mhm.
And what's really emerged out of that are a whole bunch of people who've been really interested in a way of being when it comes to managing communities who've had trauma and high levels of stress. So we could think about Alcoholics Anonymous, domestic violence support groups, social and historical trauma groups. Like we could think about Black Lives Matter and other
Mhm.
groups of that nature, right? And what trauma informed debriefing really is hinting at is how do we take these core values of empowerment, um, trust and transparency, safety, historical, cultural, and gender issues. How do we take these principles and embed it within the way of being with our staff? So there's actually some things that we're doing already, right, that maybe we're not thinking about. So take, for instance, the harm reduction model that's within APS, right? So we're not
Mhm.
jumping in and trying to rip people out their homes or say, for instance, if we have someone who has some severe hoarding in their home, we're not automatically ripping things out of their home thinking that's going to shepherd them into safety. What we're doing is what are those small incremental practices that can actually help them improve over time?
Mm.
In Connecticut, there's been SACEs that actually adopted a module called, not a module, but an approach called concept, where for child welfare service professionals who are involved in removals, they actually created a safe space environment for them, for workers in particular, where they can come to de-escalate and regulate their emotions after such a traumatic instance like a removal, right? So, Geoff, think about what we've been talking about previously, how intense the work is. And without the proper attention, we're actually contributing to the stress of the individual, leading to burnout. So, with these different principles that we see
Mm.
in different areas, using these six core values within our trauma informed practice, we're actually embedding what relational health actually looks like within the supervisory practice that is sometimes absent when we think about cases that have emergencies that need a 24-hour turnaround, if not shorter.
Mhm. So let's put a pin in this because I think I wanted to circle back to you touched on what I heard was a debriefing process that would not be as effective.
Yeah.
Can you, I'd like to sort of close that loop, and if you could talk a little bit about that,
Yeah. So when we
aspects of what aspects of a debriefing process that's ineffective and potentially, yeah, yes, potentially bad, is for
Right.
lack of a better word.
No, absolutely. And I think we could even draw back as far as the 80s again with Sandra's work. What she noticed within her clinic is that providers who used exclusively authority for their engagements saw high
Mm,
levels of re-traumatization, high
mm,
levels of disruptive behaviors, and also decline in emotional well-being. And what she's come to learn in her research and what we know today throughout different industries, that towering over someone is the absence of relationship, right? Think about how it is if you could draw back to maybe some of the teachers you didn't feel close to. They were the ones that were more judgmental. They were the ones where you felt like you had to perform in order to be accepted. And I think that's a lot of our social service work, where we find ourselves in positions where we're responsible for case outcomes. And unless we have something great to tell our supervisor, we may feel anxious. We may feel, somewhat worried that we're not doing our job, especially when we're not getting the outcomes that we hope for. So trauma-informed debriefing allows for all of that nuance to come into this space, and especially not ignoring the impact that someone has going through these critical times rather than only focusing on the outcomes.
So those seven commandments are really critical for people to if they want to be effective in a debriefing process.
Yeah.
Could you just repeat them?
So I'm going to do one better. We're going to shorten it from 7 to 6 because SAMHSA adopted these values and really turned it into their own. And SAMHSA, just for folks who aren't aware of, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. Is it association, Geoff? Help me out here.
I think it's agency, but
Agency,
we
yeah.
know who you're talking about.
Right. So, no, it's the administration. My apologies. So, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. Acronyms. Our work is so full of acronyms, Geoff.
Totally.
So what they adopted through their practice is safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, empowerment, choice and voice, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. And that last six piece was added on top of some prior research that was done to consider the systemic oppression and challenges that different identities face in our society today. So we say that when those values are embedded within our interactions with those who experience high levels of trauma and stress, the more that we'll see collaboration and outcomes geared towards the change that we want to make rather than further harming and reintroducing trauma into that person's life.
So I think this is really interesting because it also you're creating an environment, I think, where people can do this work and come back and feel supported. Would that be correct? I mean, can the debriefing process impact a workplace culture?
Absolutely, Geoff. And I think, in fact, it is the goal. I often say as a joke, we need to bring the social back in social work. We've definitely become an industry geared towards the evidence, quantitative data, right? And long has been missing the qualitative information, which really makes us special as human beings. So when we take that out the equation, our workspaces are going to be modes of survival because my personhood, who I am, and my experiences aren't being taken seriously. And Geoff, and at the intersection of needing to keep your job, right? Think about the pressure for folks who don't feel safe in their work environments, but not continuing to work in those environments will lead them to more harm because then that creates another issue for them, right? So now we have people in our workspace who don't feel safe, and that negatively impacts the outcomes, right? Geoff, think about how important transparency. So we've been having this discussion about the difference between healthy and unhealthy debriefing, so to speak, right?
Yes.
Geoff, in all of your experience of being a supervisor, what are some of the dangers of not having transparency with staff, with the people?
So Omari, I would hesitate to, or I would caution you in saying, in my own view, looking back, was not the best supervisor. And I think, quite frankly, I leaned a lot more in terms of, I leaned a lot into our authority. I've learned not to do that ironically, as I moved up. But I think that if I was thinking about a team when I was a supervisor in adult protective services, I would say to you that some of the things you were talking about in terms of authority, in terms of, I think you might have felt safe on my team if you were doing what I deem to be effective work. But if you were not, I think there was a bit of an ice storm. So I'm pretty sure there was a pretty of an ice storm.
Yeah.
Um, so with that regard, now, um, what I would say to you, and it's very sort of almost clinical, is to say two things about what I hear saying that apply to me now as I supervise a totally different team that's not engaged in frontline service work, is that the idea that somebody can and will make a mistake and feels like they can come to me and actually say, this is what happened,
Yeah.
and this is how I think I can resolve it, or I need to work with you to resolve it, is they feel that sense of comfort. That's critical to so much more than simply about mistakes, about regular communication between myself and the people on my team.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's different. I think there are a lot. You touched on the whole thing about systems making demands on quantitative data, which I thought was an elegant way of saying that the numbers matter a little bit more than the people sometimes. And we look at numbers as the quantifiers or the qualifiers of success.
Right.
Um, I, I think the interesting thing about how you said that debriefing can influence a workplace culture positively is really something to think about.
Absolutely, Jeff. And because when we think about the industry that we're working in, as you mentioned before, stress and trauma is our occupational hazard. And along with the science in trauma informed care, in stress management, in mental well being, relationships are that gateway, that key to undoing and restoring what's been lost through trauma, stress, and burnout. So, debriefing is, in fact, part of the responsibilities of our work, being that we're an industry that deals so heavily within trauma and stress. So, Jeff, also to just share some compassion, a lot of your colleagues and a lot of mine also have come from a space where, as supervisors, not necessarily adopting a trauma informed care approach, but more of an authoritative approach. And I think that is a systemic trauma that we are also facing, right? So,
Mm.
think about what many supervisors had to do in order to get their position, right?
Mhm.
Work in impossible conditions, produce in even just really difficult odds. And without the proper support or even different ways of seeing how to do the work, I think it's natural. Like we treat others how we were treated, right? Which is why in this trauma informed care, when we think about debriefing in this way, it's an opportunity to model emotional
Mhm.
regulation,
Mhm.
model what it looks like to walk into a traumatic or a crisis situation without being on alarms, but show and model the steps of how do we assess, how do we actually find what's going on in the situation before we start prescribing solutions or with the belief that we know the solution to the problem when in fact individuals once they're empowered can give us so much more information
Mhm.
versus our assumptions. So that's what we're really hoping for. It's an invitation to community that I think, as you mentioned earlier, if I slip up and fall, I know Jeff has my back rather than, ooh, I probably forgot this information during my engagement. I don't want to be on Jeff's side. I don't want to experience that hailstorm. So maybe I might start omitting some information, or I really don't agree with what my supervisor says in terms of approaching this engagement. I'm actually going to make some other decisions, and I'll just tell my supervisor something else
Mhm.
so that it doesn't become disrupted. And when communication breaks down like that in a work where we're interconnected, our outcomes also break down naturally.
Right, right. So, Omari, we're coming to the close of this episode, which I thought was really very interesting, and I you do coaching and training. You do some training for us, I know, and you do coaching. Do you do coaching this for people who are interested in receiving coaching around different
Yeah,
aspects of?
I've provided coaching for community-based organizations and other institutions around this as well. Yeah.
So we can make your email available.
Absolutely. Any friend of yours is a friend of mine, Jeff.
Oh, good. We're doing friends now. Excellent. So um, one of the things, though, I also heard is that we called this segments supervisory debriefing, right? And what I um, what I understand as you were talking and unfolding it, it's broader than simple supervision. It has strong links to leadership.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, for get your feelings about how, what are your feelings about that? I mean, is this, is this a thing that we should maybe call this episode leadership debriefing?
I think that makes a great point because when we think about the opportunities that leaders have, it's not only in their messaging or the direction that leaders believe that we can go in, but they actually set the tone and the pace for what's expected within the environment.
Yep.
And in fact, they're the ones who are responsible for spearheading what that looks like. Going back to what we've been talking about today, with the expectation that our staff are going to be working in stressful environments, exposed to vicarious trauma and things of that like, the leader has the opportunity to create interventions from what is predictable, right? To now create spaces where we know our staff are going to have days where they deal with someone with hoarding. What are some of the what kind of interventions can we provide? What kind of ways of being can we be during supervision to provide a level of support that provides sorry, y'all. I'm breaking fourth wall real quick because I notice I'm glitching. So just undo your magic. If I could start over really quickly. Um, so with supervisors being able to create the environment for staff as a safe landing of sorts, a safety net when being put into the community experiencing vicarious trauma, leaders have the ability to build capacity for that, and staff are now welcomed into that community to contribute to that well-being for the environment as well.
So I know we say we're going to closing, but you then inspired me to ask you this question.
Mhm.
Um, and for the folks at home, we've never discussed this before. Um, is is it also possible for the members of the team to do debriefing?
Absolutely. I think there are different models already that support that as well. Take, for instance, the coaching model. In coaching, it's typically asked for the coachee to bring in whatever topics or things of interest that are on their mind to lead the discussion. So, Jeff, I think also when you put it that way, we could think of it as sharing power.
Hmm.
I think oftentimes the leader is looked at as the person who should have all the answers,
Hmm.
right? When I think, in fact, the leader is someone who can bring people together and through synthesizing all the information can come up with the most appropriate answer for whatever that goal is. Uh,
Hmm.
so including staff on debriefing, having them lead and bringing some information, I think that's an empowering tool for supervisors as it helps bring to surface maybe some spaces the supervisor or the leader hasn't thought about, things that speak directly to the needs without being spoken for. This empowers staff to actually speak up for themselves. And now they're able to develop more critical thinking skills, feel more part of the process rather than passively in the process, having to only listen to what leadership is saying, when instead they get to feel like they pick up uh, ounces of leadership throughout the job and it's not just based on one person's ideas.
So, in summary, in terms of the concept of debriefing, which is a very powerful concept, what would you want our listeners to leave with?
To not leave the qualitative out of the work, right? The quality, the emotional well-being. We work in an industry where one of our primary objectives is to gain trust of an individual. We
Mhm.
think about how vulnerable that is and connected to a person's identity and well-being. We need to maintain a level of presence for our staff who are encountering those spaces. This is why throughout the years we've seen so much high levels of burnout, and loss of retention within our workspaces because the outcomes have overshadowed the people who are actually driving them. And when we can go back to connect to the individuals who are actually doing the work, helping them process through what they're experiencing, we could actually continue developing more leaders for the future rather than more people who are just there to do the quantitative stuff, just to get those objectives done.
So qualitative as opposed to transactional.
Yeah, bring back qualitative work. And the transactional piece, again, I think as human beings, we don't operate as such, right? Like when I work hard or if I'm giving of myself, my hope is that the community that I'm doing it for it's well received. And when I'm met with vitriol from my supervisor instead of support, it makes me feel like I'm not reaching my goal, right? Like burnout is a sense of I'm working hard and I'm not seeing any positive outcomes. And in debriefing and through connection, where a supervisor is able to support the contextualizing of an engagement or even apply some affirmations for the work that's being done, I think we'll see staff and supervisor collectively feel more rewarded by this work rather than burned down by the work not ever feeling done.
Creating trust in relationships throughout the workplace can lead to positive outcomes. Omari, thank you so much.
Thank you, Geoff.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Look forward to coming here again.